Welcome to the Rosenfeld Review. This is Lou Rosenfeld, your host. And today I am joined by Darryl Adams, the Director of Accessibility at Intel. Hi, Darryl. How are you?
Hey, Lou. Thank you so much for having me today. Pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you join. We're going to be talking about the issue of accessibility, especially at conferences, which lately I feel like I've got coming out of my ears. So I'm certainly interested in it. I know many of you are, whether you speak there, you put on at conferences, you're conference producers, you're doing internal conferences. In the days of Zoom, we're all at least in the virtual conference business one way or another. So I thought it would be great to have Darryl on. Darryl leads a team at Intel that works at the intersection of technology and human experience, helping discover new ways for people with disabilities to work, interact, and thrive. Darryl, tell me a little bit more. Tell a little bit about your mission and your passion here, and how it connects to what Intel's about, and your background here.
Sure thing. So, accessibility at Intel there's a number of facets. One is the importance of making sure that Intel is a great place to work for employees with disabilities. So we continue to try to drive an inclusive environment, but really getting down to an accessible environment for everyone. It's always a long road, and that's something that we're working toward. But then I think the really kind of key aspect in my mind around what accessibility really means for Intel is the future possibility of creating a future of technology that is fully inclusive and accessible for everyone. Really thinking from the beginning about how we create new computing architectures, new technologies that everyone can use. So that's really what drives me specifically. And that really comes from a personal space for me where I have retinitis pigmentosa, so I'm legally blind and losing my eyesight from the outside in. And I'm also deaf in my right ear. And so these challenges have really kind of shaped my perspective on working with a disability, interacting with technology, how that can be a barrier, as well as how it can be of tremendous benefit. But it's always we need to be deliberate in the way that we design technology in order to make it a benefit and not a barrier.
So actually, I want to ask a little bit before we get into the conference side of things about that work at Intel. Now, I always think, like a lot of people, maybe wrongly, that Intel is primarily a technology company. I also think of a lot of accessibility is less about the design of the technology and more about the application of the technology and how it's combined with design, really. Um, how much of what you do at Intel is about impacting the way that the technology itself is created versus how it's applied?
So Intel has a long history, over 50 years of innovating computing and actually creating computer architecture. So really the think of it as like the foundation of how we design. So today, if you're designing software, you're designing software that within some constraints around a 2D screen. You're expecting an input from a keyboard and or a mouse, and you're building, you're innovating, and you're designing around that paradigm. And that computing architecture that is the foundation of that experience is a culmination of a lot of the work that Intel does under the hood, and the work that we do obviously with across the industry as well, with partnering with computer manufacturers, operating system vendors, that type of thing. So my thinking here is that when we think about true accessibility and true kind of user experience, user interaction with technology, it's, I think, smart to start thinking about what do we do beyond that standard computer interface that we have today.
Mm-hmm.
We have to think about this also along the lines of if we look over time, today we are just a single plot point on a graph. But if you see that graph out, say 10, 15, 20 years from now, computing power will be exponentially will increase exponentially, and the types of the capabilities that will bring to us, I think it stands to reason that we should be thinking beyond sitting in front of computers and typing and that type of thing for basically our primary mode of interaction. And I feel that this is where we can come and think about new computing architecture and how we can evolve to take advantage of all the new capabilities that we see before us.
Well, and you're reminding me that Intel's in this position to create computing architectures and also obviously influence many, many other players in the industry. So I imagine there's a great almost amplification effect you can have by being right there at Intel thinking and talking about this issue. So it feels a little like we just moved from grandiose to now I'm gonna take us to the very sort of nitty gritty of being a person with disabilities who speaks at conferences. And I know you have a lot of thoughts on this. I'm certainly interested as a conference organizer to know what can be done to make it more welcoming, more inclusive for people to speak at conferences.
Yeah, I think so. The conference context is broad.
Mm,
Really appreciate the question of how do we make conference experience for speakers more accessible. I think we've been having the conversation about how do we do accessible conferences for the audience for a while now, and it's important to consider the speakers as well. And I would say that it all starts at the beginning. So to me, accessibility, as we always are thinking about accessibility as being present from the very beginning, from the first conversations. And so when you're planning a conference, it's not plan the conference and then figure out what we need to do with accessibility. It's plan the accessible conference from the start.
hmm
From the audience perspective, that goes from that starts at the website and the approach that you take for registration, ensuring that's fully accessible. And then on the speaker side is ensuring that you're open to or giving the speakers the opportunity to describe what they need in terms of an environment to be able to effectively engage. And so if we're talking about a physical space, and so we're at a in-person conference, it's important to be able to be able to provide access to the space and understand what technologies may or may not need to be used to support the speaker. Generally, I think that's true for probably most speakers, but it's also really important because there's the devil is in the details on the nuance that somebody who is speaking with maybe with a disability. In my case, I can describe the example of visual impairment makes it very difficult for me to track anything visual in terms of like I can't read a teleprompter, for example, and having to rely on visual cues is challenging at best. And so if I set my speaking engagement up where I am expecting a very specific, non-subtle visual cue, and I don't get it, then that becomes a problem. So having that ability to really go through the motions prior to the actual event is important, and I think that also applies to the digital context as well.
So getting to know the technology basically that's at your fingertips. What visual cues you may be expected to know, and if those aren't working, how to replace them with alternatives. Um, do you find that besides seeing it in advance and having that type of orientation, um, different events have a different flavor, voice, tone. Is like, is there any kind of correlation between, let's say, how formal the feel of an event is, and um, how much you are expected, for example, to present rather than discuss. Does that have any impact, or is that really more an issue of personal style, regardless of accessibility issues?
I would say that, well, so I certainly think there's a personal style aspect to that. I think, and this is also maybe a function of each individual's personal journeys with disability. This level of disability for a long time have learned the tips, tricks, techniques to manage it and be able to speak confidently in with the tools that they have. Then I think a formal approach is fantastic. In many cases, and I think mine is one of them. My disability is progressive, so I feel like I'm never really quite an expert in the with the tools that I have because I'm continuously needing to learn, and that kind of lends itself to probably a more casual style,
Hmm.
more conversational. Because of what I like to do, and I think where I'm able to convey my ideas the best is through conversation rather than reading slides. And I mean, and I do think that actually, while that is helpful for the disability context and for accessibility, I think it's also probably should be true in general.
Amen. I mean, I think this sort of more, you could call it casual, you could call it interactive, maybe human is really ultimately the way to look at it. But my gut is that removing pressure, like following a tightly organized script, e.g., reading slides, is probably better for everyone in every context who's speaking. Um, Another question. Uh, do you think a conference, let's say an in-person conference organizer, should today be prepared not only to do the kind of orientation that you're talking about, again, not just really for disabled speakers, but really for all. Again, it removes that pressure and makes people more comfortable, but support remote speakers, because that is sometimes, I would imagine, a real benefit to disabled speakers is the option to speak remotely.
Yes, yeah, I think, and that also actually does address one of the more sort of technical issues around the transition of speakers. So if you are on site and maybe doing a transition from one speaker to the next, and the new speaker is going to use maybe a braille display, or they're going to have some integration with an earpiece where they're listening to some audio cues or something like this, that's pretty difficult to do, or at least it's more time consuming than simply handing a mic to the next person. Um, so those are challenges. But then the ability to present remotely is probably it's a great way to allow somebody to feel most comfortable in their environment, and also then they own all of the technology that they need to be successful. The one caveat that I would note here is that as much as my hardware, my physical devices are set up to optimally for me, I don't have control over the platform that's being used. So the software platform that the uh, conference is using, and that's something I think is really important to consider. Is when you're choosing the platform, is choose something that is going to be accessible for most people, or hopefully for all people. But because not all platforms are created equal, and some are much more difficult to interact with visually than others, and that really kind of that makes it much more challenging, certainly from a visual impairment standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, our approach is just generally to use platforms that are the most generic. Uh, so conferences being produced, let's say in Zoom, familiar, obviously, to many people, speakers, organizers, and such. But also, my gut is that they're more likely to have had rigorous accessibility studies perform than maybe more of a niche or boutique tool.
Yeah, and I think so. Thinking about standard platforms that get a lot of usage, definitely a good starting point. I do think that there's an additional piece to this that is about how you use them. So Zoom in particular, it's a simple platform, so that's always good. Simpler the better, in my opinion. But then you need to know if you're going to go with like an automated captioning, then you let your audience and your speakers understand that, because that may be simple and it's better than no captioning, but you're going to definitely, or most likely run into some issues with the accuracy of those captions. So if somebody's relying on captioning, that's something to note, especially in thinking about the speaker. So generally, you're thinking about captioning for audience purposes. But if you have a speaker who is hearing impaired and is trying to follow a conversation, say on a panel, for example,
Hmm.
they're also going to be needing to be able to see those captions and maybe be relying on their accuracy. So that's an important thing to consider. And additionally, for say if you have a deaf speaker who is going to be using ASL interpretation, making sure that you have that flow well integrated in Zoom, ensuring that you're pinning the interpreter correctly and that everybody has a great connection. Because if you think about, generally an audience or a speaker might have a little bit of tolerance for a poor connection for video, as long as the audio is clear. But when you're doing ASL, you really need to have a clear video connection in order to avoid issues with breaking up the flow of the conversation.
Yeah, I as an organizer, if you have any type of distributed actors, let's say, someone doing ASL here, a speaker there, I get really nervous about things like lagginess and what that could do to the whole flow, not only for the speakers but for the audience as well. One last question from a speaker's perspective: is there any appeal, in particular, to doing sessions that are pre-recorded? So we see certainly in the virtual conference space, a lot of conference producers have their speakers record. They play the recording. It's a very controllable type of thing, and then maybe they have their speakers join for a Q&A. We've resisted that. We like the live feel. It just feels more human, feels more normal, has a bit of spontaneity, but I can see the benefit. Is there would you say there's a strong accessibility benefit for going with recorded talks?
I would say that there could be, but I also would. I think I would more agree with you in that the feel of a live conversation is preferable, in that it is a more human experience for everybody involved. And there is, the downside of that obviously is that if you're live, then you're unable to edit and redo. But that's also maybe the reason why the live is so much more compelling. Um, but I think that well, certainly, I guess I would encourage people to, when given the opportunity to do something live versus recorded, to choose the live option. But I do see that mainly where that might come into play also is when with somebody with speakers who are maybe new to
Hmm.
the public and are a little bit nervous about having only one take, and I can see where that could come into play. But I don't know in terms of disability or accessibility in general that whether or not that's a key issue. It doesn't feel to me like it should sway one way or the other.
Well, the takeaway I have from this discussion about accessibility for speakers is I'll take a page out of the accessibility book, Web for Everyone, that we published by Sarah Horton and Whitney Quisenberry, which is It's really an accessibility first thing. If we think about accessibility from the get go, as you're saying, not as a overlay later, but from the speaker experience from the get go, it's a better experience for all speakers. With that, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about accessibility for disabled audiences. We're going to try to take a crack both at virtual and in person, and maybe even in the hybrid experience. We'll be right back. Hey, it's Lou, and I want to put in a plug for a very special experience that Rosenfeld Media is putting on. It's the Design at Scale 2022 conference. It's taking place June 8th through 10th, and it will be 100% virtual. Why are we doing this conference? Well, first of all, it's the latest edition of a conference that's taken a lot of different shapes over the last 7 or so years. It was the Enterprise UX Conference for a while, then it was Enterprise Experience, and the last couple of years, Design at Scale. This year in particular, we are looking back at the last couple fun years we've all been having, taking the lessons, looking at some of the challenges, pulling together and distilling what we've learned, and using what those lessons are to help map a path forward. So look at this conference in a way, if you work in a large organization as a designer or researcher, what have you, as an opportunity to reflect and then pivot and take what we are covering in these 3 days and arm yourself to move forward. That's what Design at Scale is going to be about. If you want to know the themes, the first one, we have a whole day on this, is design practices in times of crisis. The second day is all dedicated to design processes for a new normal. And the third day, the third theme, is design people caring for individuals and teams. If this sounds up your alley, come to the website, designatscale.co, check out the program. I think you'll be impressed. And again, we do virtual really well. I think you'll enjoy the experience. I hope we'll see you June 8th through 10th at Design at Scale 2022. Welcome back to the Rosenfeld Review. Lou Rosenfeld with my guest, Darryl Adams, Director of Accessibility at Intel. And we've been talking about accessible conference design, primarily from the perspective of how this can be considered improved, tweaked, and tuned for disabled speakers. We're going to move on now to the audience and what we can do by considering accessibility principles and design from the get-go rather than applying it post facto and hoping we do well. Well, let's start then, Darryl, with in-person conferences. I think, most of us are pretty familiar with that experience, even if we haven't had the opportunity to enjoy it for a couple of years now. Are there any like the big items on the checklist for an organizer to consider for a disabled in-person audience member?
Yes. So I would say that first and foremost, the details matter. And so every bit of the conference goer's experience should be looked at closely to understand where accessibility may be a factor or may need to be a factor. For example, arriving at a conference venue for the first time, what is the expectation for your audience? The first step is typically that you're going to go to a registration desk. So does that registration desk support, and will they be able to support people across the spectrum of disability? So if somebody is blind, if somebody is deaf, if somebody is approaching in a wheelchair, do they understand how to assist those people appropriately? So there's a general need to right from the registration desk to be able to engage and support people where they are as they need it. So there's a bit of, I think, underlying that is you have to educate that frontline staff appropriately right from the start, because I think getting that initial engagement is huge. If I go to a conference and I recognize that people are they understand where I'm coming from as far as just being visually impaired and having a bit of a difficult time maybe making my way around. That's a really big difference, because otherwise the feeling is I'm lost in a sea of people, and maybe I'm fairly anxious about this because I don't know where I'm going, I'm not sure who to ask, that type of thing. So having that type of support system right at the front is a great start.
Just along those lines, it makes me think of people who are like fully vision impaired. I almost wonder if navigating a new space, like a conference space, like, look for these doors, go to you can get to the registration desk. It'll be to the left, and et cetera, et cetera. Is there any kind of audio mapping that conferences or in other contexts maybe you've seen work, almost like having an audio version of where to go, how to orient, how to navigate the space?
Sure. Yeah. Interestingly, we are doing some work at Intel with a company called Good Maps, which does indoor wayfinding, indoor mapping, primarily for people who are blind or visually impaired. And so this is, fairly new technology that allows somebody to use their mobile device, very similar to how you would use the GPS in your car. So
Hmm.
you can plug in your destination, and it will give you step-by-step directions for how to get there, and then also provide points of interest along the way if necessary, or if wanted. This is new in that, and it requires the venue to be scanned initially, and then in order to enable that service. But I think it's really promising, because I think that it kind of addresses that key element of the unknown. It removes
Hmm.
some significant variables, and I think that's maybe the name of the game here, is to how do you remove as many variables as possible for your guests. Make it very clear. So in one sense, the indoor wayfinding or navigation system is fantastic. Coupling that with the ability to, or maybe having a kiosk that is just like a concierge type of thing, that where somebody can get full or gain assistance that they need, depending, regardless of what specific assistance that might be. Um, yeah.
And that sort of sense of like the idea of audio signage. I love that the technology is coming for that, and it actually technically it doesn't sound like it would be necessarily the hardest thing. Just a really good application of existing technologies. Um, but you're talking about at the very get go at the registration desk. I wonder if it goes back even further, like signaling on a conference website. That's often the first place, or for an in-person conference, venue selection from the get-go is really challenging. So, just as an example, we're based in New York City. We do a lot of our events in New York City. It's a vertical city. It's not as accessible in terms of public transportation as we would like it to be. But then the venues themselves are often on multiple floors. May not be a whole lot of elevator capacity. Those are considerations as well, I'd imagine.
Absolutely. And I think the more that, so elevators should be sufficient, but if there's limited capacity, then that is an issue. But that would be something absolutely to be considering. And I think that, to your point about the like this pre-conference experience, there's a lot we can do to attract people with disabilities. But I think if you think about let's say if you are deaf, you're likely not going to a conference that you are if you're not sure whether or not there will be sign language interpretation available, or maybe that it's limited, because we pretty quickly think that it's probably not worth the money and the time to do that, because I'm not going to be able to hear the message. So if we turn that around, and we start advertising more broadly about how we are supporting various disabilities, so we state very clearly that we're going to have all sessions signed and as well as captioned, as well as support for wheelchair access and blind and visually impaired services. We state those explicitly and describe how we expect to support that. Then we can start actually engaging people with disabilities more and getting more, having them more likely to show up at our events. It's kind of a chicken and egg problem. Today, I think a lot of events look at their audiences and say, well, we don't have a lot of people with disabilities that we need to make all these accommodations. And the reason for that is because the event isn't and hasn't historically been accessible to begin with. So we need to get ahead of that and start really communicating and advertising to that disability community and then supporting them. And probably also importantly is there's nobody does this perfectly. And so as long as we're deliberate about wanting to do this well and then learning from each experience, like learning what didn't go well and addressing it and applying creating new solutions for new events and just growing over time, that's the key.
What about at virtual events? Do you see that being a very different challenge for an organizer considering attendees with disabilities? I mean, you can argue that it's like a huge win from the get go in terms of just opening up content and event experiences to a much broader audience, many of whom can't travel for whatever reason.
So a virtual event is going to bring far more people, far more diversity into the conference, into the event. It does, and I think it also eliminates a lot of the obviously those physical challenges. You don't have to worry about the elevator capacity, but it introduces new challenges and things. These challenges I think are actually more subtle, but have probably significant impact to the audience. And an example would be that if you are uh, a blind user that uses a screen reader and you're watching a session, in the session if you have the chat enabled, then what's happening is that you're listening to that chat the entire time the session is going. So if you have something that's creating a lot of engagement in the session on the chat, then you are having to divide your attention between the speaker and this chat that's coming through your headphones as well. And that can be quite distracting. And so that's something that's hard to balance, but I think giving it appropriate consideration to understand how best to manage that is something to be thinking about. Um, and there's some, I think there's a few other scenarios there where we have to be mindful of how we expect our audience to engage, not only with the speakers but with each other. And this is difficult because it's sort of depending on your own context and your personality type and how you uh, retain information. What works well for somebody will not work well at all for someone else,
Hmm.
and it's a matter of just being. I think at the end of the day, we need to be mindful that we're a collection of unique people with unique needs, and we want to listen and respond appropriately. But it's really important to understand where people are coming from and what they need and try to address it as become more apparent.
Hey, that's really interesting. I mean, I'm thinking about what you're saying, and specifically in the virtual conference setting, the amount, like our uh, discussion goes on concurrent with the presentations in Slack. We have really high levels of audience engagement in Slack, and someone who's blind would obviously have a problem with that in terms of distraction. Um, but what it makes me think of is just like on certain trains, there's the quiet car. You know, keep your phones off, keep your conversation low. It's almost like you want to have the quiet channel,
Yes.
and maybe that's not just for people who are blind. It's just that there are many types of people for various reasons who might benefit from that. So, just yet another example of how thinking, being thoughtful about design for people with different disabilities it opens up all kinds of possibilities for everyone. Um, I want to make sure we touch on hybrid, um, which is like the great mystery for many of us. Where a lot of people I know are thinking about it. Very few of us have gone more than dipping a toe in. It's a bit scary because it's an interesting design challenge to make a single experience work for two fairly disparate audiences and to bring them together when appropriate and when possible. Um, we're doing our first one. It'll be the Design Up Summit in September. Uh, been a lot of interesting, fun work designing for that, but we haven't. It's good timing. I'm glad I'm talking to you now because we haven't really thought too much about accessibility in that particular context. I wondered if you've encountered people who are thinking about this and have maybe already had some experience.
Yeah, I do think that this hybrid model is going to be the most challenging uh, shift that we've seen, since the pandemic began. The challenge is going to be more. It is a technology challenge, and so I think it is completely solvable. But we're going to probably make a lot of mistakes along the way. There, I think it's really important to not underestimate the complexity and the challenges around audio in a hybrid model. If you have a room full of people, or to say a room with people around a table, and then you have a number of remote participants, the audio in the room is always more difficult to hear when you're on the line, when you're the remote participant. And so we need to think of ways that help resolve that. And the idea would be, as an example, that each of the in-room participants has a mic of some sort, and that we're that testing these models in advance to understand where how best to optimize everybody's individual contribution. It's really, really distracting listening to a room that is echoing and people are talking over each other, and some people are loud and some people are soft. And that's in the best case. And if you have a hearing impairment of any sort, you're probably getting no value from that
Hmm.
experience. And alternatively, when you are in the room, we have to make sure that we have an engagement model visually to help remind people that there are participants that are not sitting next to them. And so we can do this today with video technology, but there's a lot of, I think this is another area where the nuance and the details matter. We need to come up with really seamless models that we to display remote participants when that's appropriate, to ensure that they're not being left behind and that they're being engaged and not they're not an afterthought if that's the type of really conversation that's happening. And we need to really just continue to maximize and optimize the audio, in particular the audio in the room.
Excellent points. And just to maybe step back and summarize, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Keep experimenting. And you've made a really important point about being thoughtful from the very beginning. And this is, a really important point in design in general is that thoughtfulness for all important audiences, again, from the start rather than after the fact. Um, we're going to have to wrap up, which is a bummer because I know we've already gone a little longer than we thought, but there's just so much we could talk about here. Maybe we'll have to have a part two at one point. But Darryl, I wanted to ask you in Rosenfeld review tradition if there's anyone or anything that you've been learning from lately that you want to shine a bit of light on for our audience.
Sure thing. Yeah, so we have a book that we typically recommend to Intel folks when they're just starting their accessibility journey or needing to learn and understand more about disability. The book is called Demystifying Disability, and it's by Emily Ladow. And I can't say enough good about it. It is a book that is simple to read or listen to in my case. It gives you the vocabulary and the tools that you need to have in order to have respectful engaging conversations with people with disabilities. It just really kind of opens the door to the whole community and gives a really nice kind of overview and understanding of a lot of the differences and the complexities that we have to navigate. So not a lot of time to invest in that book, as far as it's a fairly short read, but you'll guaranteed to gain some valuable insights from it.
Well, short reads are the best reads. Demystifying Disability by Emily Ladau. And Darryl, thank you so much. Great discussion. Again, I wish we had a little bit more time. We've been talking with Darryl Adams, Intel's Director of Accessibility. Thanks so much for joining us on the Rosenfeld Review.
Thank you again, Lou. It was a great pleasure to be here.
Thanks for listening to the Rosenfeld Review, brought to you by Rosenfeld Media. If you like our show, please subscribe and review it on iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast platform. I'd love it if you tell a friend to have a listen, and check out our website for over 100 podcasts with other interesting people. You'll find them all at rosenfeldreview.com.